Good afternoon. My name is Kalina Oroschakoff. I'm Politico Europe's climate correspondent and the founding member of its energy and climate team. As such, I've followed the ETS, so the emissions trading system, for quite a while, and I look much forward to discussing the coming shakeup of the EU emissions trading system with you. You are watching Politico Live. Welcome. Before we begin, thanks to the Polish Electricity Association, PKEE, which is sponsoring today's virtual event. Also, before we begin, I would like to just tell all of our viewers that we have a slight delay in one of the participating members. Diederik Samsom, the head of cabinet of Executive Vice President for the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, is currently still stuck in an internal commission meeting. Lots to discuss, so you see we're really live. Hopefully he will join us soon, but just so you know, we currently have 4 of our panelists on your screens, but hopefully will be complete soon. Returning to the program, so thanks to all our viewers for joining online. You can watch it on our website, on Twitter, on Facebook and LinkedIn. And of course, please get involved, ask questions and engage online. So tweet about it at Politico Events and ask questions via Slido using the hashtag #EmissionsShakeup. If you're following us from the event website, Slido is embedded below the live stream window, so scroll down and you'll see it. If you're following us from Facebook or Twitter, just use the Slido app on your computer or phone and use the hashtag #EmissionsShakeup to ask your questions. Now, if you're on Slido, you will see that there's a poll presented by PKE asking you that very question. Are you in favor of extending the current EU ETS scope to new sectors, in particular building and transport? And then you have 3 answers that you can decide among. That is 1, yes, the EU ETS should be extended to buildings and transport. No, however, a separate standalone ETS for buildings and transport should be established to put a carbon price on these sectors. And again, no, buildings and transport should be kept in the current effort sharing regulation scope. So for all those that don't follow EU climate policy that closely, and why should you? The effort sharing regulation is essentially the national emissions reduction target that have been set by Brussels. So moving on, and before we get started, here's a word from Pawel Straczyński, the president of the management board of TAURON and the Polish Electricity Association. Welcome.
Yeah, hello, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Polish Electricity Association, I am honored to open the debate on such an important topic as the upcoming revision of the EU ETS directive. As we are all awaiting Commission's proposal for the new revision expected in June, it's indeed a perfect time to assess the functioning of the EU ETS in the past and to discuss how the system could be improved to enable cost-efficient decarbonization and to support all member states in their efforts toward achieving climate objectives for 2030 and 2050. Let me start by referring to the Commission's proposal to assess the possible inclusion of new sectors into the EU ETS, in particular buildings and transport, as the increased emission reduction target at the European level will necessarily imply higher contribution of all sectors in the economy. Efforts to extend the current system are more complex and deserve a holistic approach. According to the Commission's 2030 climate target plan, in order to reach at least 55% emission reduction by 2030, the ETS sectors will have to bear the most significant reduction.
Unfortunately, I think it looks that we are currently frozen. We are just waiting to see whether Mr. Straczyński is coming back online. So apologies for that interruption. As we said, we are very much live and virtual. Unfortunately, it seems like Mr. Straczyński has come back, is returning.
Okay, okay, sorry for the, I don't know what happened.
Not at all. I think everyone's waiting for you to continue, so please go ahead.
For that reason, adding or linking new sectors to the current ETS architecture will undoubtedly have an impact on the number of allowances in circulation and further rise carbon prices. With skyrocketing carbon costs, electricity price for end users will continue to rise. The question that must be raised is whether it's in a spirit of just transition to put the burden of decarbonization of the most vulnerable customers. I'm very happy, hopefully Diederik Samsom will join us, who I hope will also tell us more about the Commission's plans regarding the inclusion of these new sectors into the carbon market and the plans for ensuring just energy transition for the power sector in the region of Central Europe. All this in particular important in the context of current situation on CO2 allowances market, with their prices rising above 44 euro per ton, despite the economic crisis caused by the COVID pandemic. In our opinion, the Commission should protect the EU ETS against distorting market speculations. Another relevant point I would like to raise and draw your attention is to question of just transition mechanism in the EU ETS directive. Through the Modernization Fund, the EU ETS provides one of the significant sources for revenues to finance energy transition in the most vulnerable member states. Every year, Polish companies buy more EU ETS allowances externally than the amount of allowances which Poland receives to its budget and its share of the entire pool of EU ETS allowances. This imbalance will grow in the next years, and as a result, there will be less and less resources in the Polish budget to finance programs dedicated to the energy sector transition. Instead, Polish companies will be financing the energy transition of more affluent and more advanced member states that receive more allowances than their needs and emission reduction effort would justify. To the end, as the Polish Electricity Association, we believe that in order to reflect the European Council conclusions from December last year, the Modernization Fund should be strengthened proportionally to increase the climate commitments in order to support the modernization of the power sector in low-income member states. These resources should be exclusively dedicated to the energy transition and investments in large-scale renewable energy sources like PVs, onshore and offshore wind, as well as energy storage facilities and cogeneration plants replacing coal generation. Another reason why the compensatory mechanism should be increased is nothing else but constantly growing CO2 prices. As the coal-based conventional plants cannot be shut down overnight, since Poland still lacks proportional alternative installed capacities, operational cost of domestic companies will grow. This translates directly into limiting new sustainable and green investments for Polish utilities, since we need to cover carbon costs in the first place instead of spending these funds on new investments. Higher revenues available for the Modernization Fund, for example, from using the MSR, could partially mitigate this negative effect of increasing CO2 costs and eventually boost green investments without negative consequences for the electricity bills for our customers. Dear panelists, invite you, all to the fruitful discussion on the future architecture of the EU ETS. I am looking forward to your reactions. As to Politico viewers, on behalf of the Polish Electricity Association, I wish you all an interesting and engaging debate. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Mr. Straczyński, for those words. I think for all the listeners out there, you can already see that the carbon market debate is not only one of technicalities and difficult technical changes, but also a question of politics. There are questions related to the fairness of the scheme, or at least the perceived fairness, questions regarding the future of industry in various EU countries. And so I much look forward to discussing this. Just as a few introductory remarks, also for our viewers who don't follow ETS politics on a day-to-day basis, the emissions trading system, the EU's carbon market, is one of the big issues in the bloc's climate policy discussion. It's considered as central to any effort to increase the emissions reduction goal by 2030. It's also one of the biggest, if not initially the biggest cap and trading scheme in the world. China has since come to rival the EU's, and as such it is a living animal that is moving and progressing, which is also where we're here to discuss its reform. It's been around for a very long time. It's also undergone some troubles in the past. Now, we've already heard it from Mr. Straczyński, we see prices that have gone up to even over 45 euros. There's been situations where the prices were hovering as low as €5. So you see the ETS has undergone quite a lot of turbulence over the last year. And I look forward now to discussing why that is and what can change in future with our panel. For those that haven't been listening since the very beginning, just a note, Diederik Samsom, the head of cabinet of Executive Vice President in charge of the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans' cabinet, is currently not yet online. He's stuck in a commission meeting, so hopefully he'll be joining us. But it just shows that EU policymaking is keeping everyone very busy. So with that, please welcome my panel, Haege Fjellheim, the head of carbon research at Refinitiv, Adam Guibourgé-Czetwertyński, deputy minister at Poland's Climate and Environment Ministry, Marco Mensink, director general of the European Chemical Industry Council, and I'm your moderator. And with this, I look forward to starting the discussion and already also look forward to the audience's questions. There's a lot of questions already on Slido, so please stay on and keep engaged on Twitter by tweeting at Politico events and ask questions via Slido using the hashtag emissions shakeup. So now turning to Adam first. We've heard a lot about already from the Commission as well as through the public consultation what the European Commission is considering in terms of the ETS reform. As we've heard also from our introductory remarks from the TAURON CEO, is that there's this idea of possibly extending the ETS to the transport and building sector. Is that something that Poland can support, or do you worry about these plans?
Well, this is an idea that has been floating indeed for a few months already, and I must say that we've been given some thoughts internally and looked into the issue of what would be the consequences and how you could do it. And I think we have two main concerns with this extension. First of all, is a matter of efficiency of the tool. We actually analyzed how it looks in different sectors. What is the elasticity of demand to changes in prices, and we see that this tool is probably not going to be as efficient as all the tools that we have, for instance, setting standards and rules for given sectors. It's not going to be as efficient as these tools to drive down emissions in other sectors. So that's a first concern that we have. And the second one would be the social impact of these measures. If you think about it, for instance, in terms of buildings, and you look at the reality in Poland, the richest households today, they already have heat pumps, so they would be exempted from such a scheme. And on the other side, the poorest households that are using the most emissive sources would be the one most heavily impacted by such a measure. So there is here a big issue with with the social impacts of such a measure, and it's difficult to see, not knowing what the Commission is planning, how that is going to be addressed in the Commission's proposal.
Thanks for that. As you said, we still don't know what the Commission will propose. As we've heard before, the European Commission is due to unroll a mega package of policy proposals by June, with the intention of reforming its climate policy framework to make it possible for the EU to speed up emissions cuts. The idea would be to introduce a higher 2030 target of net 55%. And for those that are in Brussels will know that we're currently also waiting for a result of the climate law trilogues, where this very target is also under discussion. So even that isn't completely certain yet. So there's a lot of uncertainties at the moment. But you were already mentioning the social implications and social concerns also of reforming the carbon market, as well as the impacts of higher fuel prices on households. However, Poland is also not the only member state that has voiced concerns or skepticism of the idea. Where still do you think this idea comes from? Why is the Commission even thinking about something that seems to not find much favor in member states as well as among industry? Marco, turning to you.
I think, and thank you for Adam's reaction and the possibility to speak up. I think there's a wide coalition against the idea of combining the industrial and electricity ETS with other sectors. But the question is not so much, and that's also to your poll, do you want it or not? Maybe the question is, why do you want it? Do you want it as revenue generator, or do you want it to have an environmental goal? And that's how at least we understand the EU ETS. Now, if you look and you combine, you would actually have to take aviation out of the current ETS and you combine it in transport, then you can get a model shift if you have all the different transport modes in one system. If you put housing and transport together with industry, there is only a cost and very little effect. So I would say we need to go back to that structure where you see NGOs and industry and governments questioning this idea of combining, which only makes sense if you just see it as a revenue generator. And I think we need to go beyond that. Finalizing there, I think some in the car industry are in favor. Some in at least what we hear government circles see the revenue. But if you go back, the most logical solution is either the standards or separate ETS, maybe linked via a conversion factor with the industrial ETS. So you'll see an unlikely coalition wide across Brussels, as we see, against this idea of a combination. Thank you.
Thanks for this, and already also raising the multiplicity of proposals and possible measures to affect change, especially when you say standards. I think there's a big debate about whether the European Commission should prioritize CO2 standards, for example, for cars, to introduce and squeeze out fossil fuels from that sector. Turning to Haege and just taking a step back, now you've been watching the ETS and especially the price developments for a long time. What is the relevance of this reform? What do you expect from it, also in terms of its impact on prices as well as market design?
Yeah, thank you, Kalina. Actually, just before our meeting started, the market passed another milestone, crossing 45 euros for the first time. So we've seen the market prices reaching ever new highs this year, and has been on a bullish trend since for the past half year. So I mean, I think we're really seeing the effect of the higher climate target already now in the prices. It's mirrored in the prices already now. I would say, I mean, that you see this future that the market is pricing in the future scarcity that will happen in this market when 55%, at least 55% target, or the target that will be agreed by lawmakers possibly today, will be implemented in the big legislative package that is coming from the Commission and in the process following that. So. I mean, it's you can discuss back and forth why prices are at the levels they are today, but I think really the fundamental reason is that the climate ambition has been stepped up from 40 to at least 55%, and this winter also being a cold winter, a bullish energy complex in general, and also a transition from the third to the fourth trading phase, so some specifics in the carbon market as well, supporting this price move. You also have, of course, this outlook for a more tight market with the climate ambition that is also attracting other actors again into this market. So there has been a lot of discussions around the role of financial actors and speculators into driving up prices, and of course that if that is a kind of perception that is living in this market, then of course that will drain support for the whole system in itself. Because I mean, you could ask whether 45 is it really a high carbon price, or is it really on the way to the prices we need to do this big transition? But you really do need support from everyone in order to get this big package through the legislative system.
Since we're already asking the question, is 45 euros a high price or high enough? Do you have a ballpark figure, or do you have numbers where you say, okay, the carbon price needs to rise to that level in order to speed up, for example, the shift away from fossil fuels, and also incentivize industry to change the way they produce? What's the price that you're looking into?
When we're doing, of course, price forecasting different scenarios, our base case, we see prices are going towards 3 digits, towards 100, towards the end of the phase, so the end of this decade, which is the price level that are needed in order for industrials that will trigger industrial abatement, and that will, in our views, be the price setting in a few years when the lower hanging fruits of fuel switching in the energy power sector has been depleted with a greening, quite rapid greening of the European power sector due to many factors.
Okay, so we're moving towards a world of 100 euro emission permits prices. Adam, how do you react to that? I mean, you've already mentioned concerns about social implications at 45 euros, concerns about the social implications of a reform to the ETS. So how do you view those developments, and what do you expect of the reform in the summer?
Well, I think the issue here of the ETS itself, and setting aside the issue of the extension to transport and buildings, but just looking at the ETS with the current scope of the ETS, mostly industry, large industrial installations and energy production. Here we have a very specific challenge with ETS prices. I mean, you've heard comments from Polish electricity producer, Polish electricity company in the introduction from Mr. Straczyński, and that gave you an idea of the difficulty these companies are facing indeed in terms of costs for their activities. The challenge from my perspective, if I think of what is the ultimate goal of the ETS, why do we have the ETS? We have the ETS in order to help us reach our climate targets, right? And how is it doing so? It is doing so by giving obviously a price signal to the market and saying, okay, if you emit more, then you're going to pay more. But at the same time, it should be a system that helps the investments happen, because if we don't build new power generation capacity in Poland, for instance, we cannot shut down the old ones, because the society, the economy still needs electricity to function. So we need to have also these resources available. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of the entire economy, it is therefore important that the revenues that are generated by the system can be reinvested in Poland, so that it can help the transformation of the Polish economy.
And do you fear?
And this is a big challenge that we have today. Is that a big part of what we are seeing is being paid by our companies located in Poland is actually not being used in Poland, not being reinvested in a transformation of the Polish economy. And we think that this is, one of the main challenges that we have to fix in this reform of the ETS, to make sure that the revenues that are generated by the ETS in the Polish economy can be reinvested to sustain the transformation of that economy. Because if we don't make these investments, emissions will never go down, because we will not be able to switch off the existing plants.
Thanks for that. It'd be great to come back to the issue of revenues and as well as how to channel these funds within the EU as well as the member states in a bit. But first I would like to turn to Marco. I mean, you represent one of the EU's biggest industries. You've been following the ETS for a long time. Now we've also already heard from Haege and from Adam that, of course, the idea is that the ETS should incentivize the shift to greener technologies and greener energy sources. How do you go into this reform moment now? What do you expect of the reform? Where is it coming, or where is the ETS currently falling short? And what do you worry about based on where the discussion is currently going?
That's quite a few questions, and you might get the list as an answer. But I think in general, what's important, first of all, and it's outside of the ETS, that we don't put all the cards on the carbon price alone, but that we get a very, very strong push to get more renewable electricity on the market at affordable prices. So don't forget that one when we talk carbon price here. The second one is that we find a balance between the ETS and the non-ETS sectors, which is fair. A third one, and that's been a debate for quite some while, that you follow the modeling in what people like Stef Vergote and Lucas Kolinski have done, which shows that by 2030, in the 55% scenario, electricity has about 70% reduction and industry 22 point something or 20.8. The reason that goes back to the old reduction curves of Connie Hedegaard's first 2050 communication, which showed that innovation in industry is not linear. There's a lot of efficiency gains, and then breakthrough technology will come in around 2030 or afterwards. And I think that's what Adam is also saying. The system needs to adapt to those specificities, and then that means for us maybe 2 caps, or not the direct linkage between the total cap and the industry cap. So you give industry the time, and you find the balance between the rest of the world at a different pace, hopefully faster, Europe moving, and the possibilities to invest. And that fine-tuning, I think, is the heart of the game this time, which indeed, if you would wrongly link it to a system with transport, wouldn't work either as such. Now, there's an add-on, which is that you see on the power sector. For those with a bit of history, the whole discussion we had in the beginning around 2005 on windfall profits was recognized at some stage, but we're still talking about a marginal pricing system in which the electricity prices include the carbon price. That one is also still out there to be rediscussed, I would say, which gives indeed the imbalance in revenues as you see them across Europe. So I would say on that overall picture, getting it right this time is about fine-tuning, knowing you talk about the directive on which every word has been, I would say, chewed on 100 times already in the past 15 years.
So what do you see concrete risks, though, based on the proposals that are being mulled or already floated in public speeches? Or do you see that there's like a certain misunderstanding or missing aspects?
I think we're still in the debate, focusing too much on, is the price high or low, or is it right? I don't think that's a very useful discussion. The price is the outcome of the system, we've always said. And you need a higher carbon price to decarbonize, and industry there mainly needs predictability. So that's clear. I think the main risk is what you see now. You have an EU ETS innovation fund. It's 21 times oversubscribed. And now industry has the project, the money would not be there. I think you hear the same from the Polish. The money needs to go, not everywhere, but out of the system to help us decarbonize as fast as we can, stimulate the innovation. And in that sense, the focus on price and on speculation and on the role of the ETS in many other topics than just the carbon market, I don't think helps us very much.
Do you agree with that, Haege? The price focus is misplaced?
I do see the need for predictability, and I think that is something that has changed with the 2050 target, 2030 target inscribed in law. It gives, I think there is a much more predictable long-term system, and that signal is being reflected in the price right now. However, if you will have challenges if the price rise too high too fast. I mean, it's the speed of this that is of a concern for many, because it's not as we've heard others that the industrial sectors are not triggered, abatement in industrial sectors are not necessarily triggered by price alone. It's lead times of technologies, investment decisions, and it's a different animal than the energy sector, where you have this lower hanging fruit and these immediate responses to carbon changes in carbon prices. So I think for the policy debate as such, what the price is during these years that we will discuss the review of the EU ETS and the whole Fit for 55 package. I mean, that will not happen in a vacuum, and how carbon prices are moving and at what levels will influence that debate. So I really think it puts these other aspects, because the price is a reaction in many ways to the higher ambition, and the other side of the coin, so the distributional aspects that we have been discussing, how you should share the revenues, which are of course also higher with a higher carbon price, and also on the competitiveness side of the European industry. So all of these other issues on how to allocate allowances, free allocation, and this new mechanism that is being floated, and will also come in the Commission's proposal on the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So these kind of aspects, this is where I see the policy debate really taking place. Although, of course, we as carbon market analysts are looking at how to implement 55% target, how the cap will be set, how the extension to new sectors, how the burden will be shared between the ETS and the non-ETS sectors, etc., and the set of the market stability reserve as well. But I think the big discussions will be around distribution of revenues and around competitiveness issues.
Marco?
Yeah, to link, I think if we're able to frame the question, because the final target after today's trialogue, the zero is clear. You're talking about one or two investments. You're talking about massive changes in a number of economies. If we're able to focus the discussion on the question, how can we make the ETS help these countries, help these industries to do it efficient as we can, you have a completely different dialogue than when you would start saying how we can make the ETS the biggest source of own revenues for the EU, very different outcome, or how do we cater to a carbon market that wants a certain outcome. So I think we should be on the first. How can ETS drive innovation and efficiency gains and change as fast as we can? And that also means you get a different sharing of the revenues, a different application. That would be maybe one of the messages. All of our companies are used to the carbon price now, are part of the system for a long time, are planning their investments, their technologies. But simply put, some of them are not there before 2030 with the best will in the world, because still lower technology levels. And if you take the money out of those companies, they can't reinvest it back in. So also there, maybe a debate warranted on how do you focus it on investment, on the improvement, and maybe one, because we have so far managed miraculously not to use the word CBAM. You're always there, almost there, Haege. What do we do with exporting sectors? Because CBAM is very much an importing sector protection. What do you do with the exporting sectors? No answers there. Can you make sure that in the free allocation system, some thoughts are given there? Thanks.
Thanks for that. Just quickly for the viewers that aren't familiar with CBAM as a as an interesting term. CBAM is supposed to say the carbon border adjustment mechanism. It's one of the measures the European Commission is planning to propose in the summer alongside the ETS reform as well as other climate policy reforms. And as you say, is supposed to target some of the broader industrial and environmental concerns that higher targets also bring with it. Just before, and I would love to take a couple of questions from viewers. First of all, thanks for being involved. Please stay with us. But first, I would just like to quickly turn to Adam, who I saw was nodding while Marco was talking about the objective of the ETS, as well as the use of revenues to really foster innovation. How do you see that debate play out? And what do you expect in terms of revenues? Because Brussels has signaled that it would like to use a part of or a share of the ETS revenues for its for EU coffers, while many countries, of course, are keen to keep it to themselves.
Well, from my perspective, it's not a matter of, if it's going for country coffers, as you said, or EU coffers. It should be going for climate-related investments. And I think, that's the dilemma that Marco was mentioning, for companies that have today no real option how to decarbonize, but are paying an ever-increasing carbon price. It is an important issue, and we need to make sure that we do have tools that enable us to invest these resources where they are needed. And in a sense, the current level of emissions that you have in a given sector is a good indication of how big of a challenge there is in that sector. Because if you are running an industrial installation that is heavily emitting, it's more than likely that the cost of changing that technology, of changing the process you're using will be very, very high as well. So you need indeed to find a way to make sure that, the polluters pay for what they're emitting, but at the same time, you have instruments to reinvest those proceeds in new installations that can replace the old emitting installations in the future.
Thanks for this. Many of the points we've already addressed and started to address in this panel have also been raised by our viewers. There's one question that is asked by Anonymous. So just a comment for our viewers, do please give your name, because it just makes it a little easier to read your questions rather than staying anonymous. But Anonymous asked, to be able to truly make the investment happen in low carbon assets, should the European Commission consider a carbon price floor or corridor to provide visibility for investors? I'm posing this to the entire panel and start with Haege.
I am an analyst. I wouldn't have any opinions on what the Commission should or should not do. I think, it has, the whole system is based on quantity, supply, demand, and a cap. And of course, now the question and the discussion around the price floors and price ceilings isn't new, and it will be part of the Commission has said that it will discuss it in the June package. What they will actually propose is another question, but I'm certain that this is one of the issues that will take a bigger stage in the policy debate following the June proposal, exactly due to the high carbon prices and the quick rise of prices. That these kind of issues are much more in focus than before. And also potential intervention also in the market. These kind of discussions, I think, we'll see much more after June.
Marco?
Yeah, you see me shaking my head because I think this is the fourth time this one has come forward in the last decades. First of all, if you already influence the volume and then you start to influence the price, where is the market? I think that's a fair question to raise, because we wanted the market-based solution to give the most economic way at the lowest cost to get the abatement technologies in. If you influence the volume and you influence the price, there is little market left. Secondly, what you'll automatically see with the price cap and a price floor is that the market will move to either side. And as smaller the corridor becomes, you in fact get a tax, which is maybe more predictable, but will maneuver in a very small space. So we're not in favor of price floors or caps. We're in favor of the emission trading system as it was designed, the most economically efficient way inside Europe and hopefully globally trading to get these investments up and running.
Adam, what do you say to a proposal like this, which I think in some extent has made it even into French and German policy papers at certain points?
Yeah, if you want predictability for companies, you need obviously both a floor and a ceiling. But if you really want predictability, you actually need a tax. But it's a whole different animal, and it has some advantages, but it's a different system. I mean, we chose to go for an ETS, a market-based instrument. Looking for the cheapest reductions. So in a sense, it's a bit paradoxical because on one end you want higher prices to give the right signal, but you should be also quite happy that you have low prices because it means you are able to achieve the reductions at a very low cost. And that's how the market should function. Again, if you want to prioritize predictability for companies, then you should probably go for just a tax, but that's going to be functioning totally differently than DTS.
Okay, I think very clear answers. Yeah, of course.
Kalina, sorry to jump in because now you come to the core of the ETS nerds. I'm one of them, and Adam triggered me. Sorry for that one, but suppose, because the cap is there, the cap is set, the reductions are met by law. Suppose if we would meet that at €5 a ton. Would that be a problem? Why is 45 better than 5? I would say 5 is better because the cap has been defined. The emissions are no longer there. That was the core of the system. But then we created add-ons and we wanted to fund other applications and innovations and revenues for which 45 has become good news. Well, I would say maybe that's not the best news. If we could meet the cap at 5, that would be what the system was designed for. Now, we're going to get higher carbon prices.
Also, if the system was working without any distortions, no? I think that's...
And there's many, but we'll get higher carbon prices. Industry will handle the higher carbon prices, but you'll never hear us comment fixed on getting a certain price because that was never part of this system. It was getting the solutions in the market at the lowest cost for Europe as a whole.
But on your point, exactly, you said there's been lots of add-ons since in 2005, the idea and the proposals started moving through the European political system. And I think that's very much also part of the discussion now. So you have the ETS, which is considered a crucial part of getting the EU to speed up its emissions cuts, to get industry to clean up, to kind of like help shift an economic and production system towards greener and cleaner pastures. And then on top of that, you have a discussion about separate CO2 standards for cars, renewable energy targets, energy efficiency targets, and more that the European Commission plans to roll out in the summer. So how do you see that overlap and sometimes mutually reinforcing system of legislative proposals? Is it something that you can now live with, or do you worry about ever more complexity over the coming years? Just quickly for Mako and then...
First of all, we're going to need all the help we can get. So I don't think there's a problem to have several policies working towards the 2050 target. Take it positive on chemicals. Electric vehicles means new cars, means market for us. Renovation wave is also market for insulation and chemicals. So you also need the demand and the market to sell into. I think what you will see, and it's more technicality, is that as the share of industry in some countries is much higher than others, the MTOE energy efficiency targets impact much more on industry than in those other countries. So you get a mix of the cap in energy consumption and the emission trading system. There's a concern. The second is the ideas out there to mix the industrial emission directive and the ETS, which is also double regulation in many respects we don't like as such. But one instrument is the clearest, and avoiding to mix the carbon price by throwing in IED or by indeed mixing energy efficiency in ETS. Because one thing I think we need to be clear as well, and that's why I started, what we really need is the amount of electrons. If you electrify industry, one of our major options, we're going to need much more electricity. If you electrify automotive, from oil to electricity, much more. So you're going to need more energy to decarbonize, not less. And in that sense, the instruments need to be balanced and fitting each other.
Adam, how do you see that discussion also from a national point of view?
Well, we need different instruments to reach our targets. We need to have actions undertaken in all sectors if we want to reach carbon neutrality. It's not only a matter of decarbonizing energy or industry. It's really actions you need across the board, across the entire economy. And to reach reductions for every sector, you will probably need to see different measures taken. I mentioned at the beginning, we did analysis on what was the impact of pricing, for instance, in transport and buildings, and we found out that it wasn't the most efficient tool to drive down emissions in those sectors. So you have to adapt the tools that you are implementing to the different sectors. That's one point that is sure. And the second element I would say is, if you are getting closer to zero and to climate neutrality as a whole, your margin of maneuver as a member state becomes smaller and smaller. And in order to achieve that target, you need to take more and more radical measures. So it becomes more and more difficult for us, member states, to do that independently, because we have a single market, and you can't see that Germany is going to say, okay, I'm going to put that restriction on that sector, and France on that sector, and Poland yet another sector. I mean, we have to do that in a coordinated way if we don't want to destroy the single market. So we need also more of these sectoral actions taken at European level, probably even more than what we can design ourselves to reach just national targets.
Thanks for this. There's one question that came through our Q&A, and that's by Femke de Jong, and I would like to ask Adam what he thinks about that, especially considering Polish demand to reform the ETS. And I see Diederik Samsom has joined us. Excitement. Yeah, now I totally lost train of thought. Not a problem. We will stretch the next 10 minutes so long that you will have had the feeling that you've been here for an hour. So thank you for joining us. Now you're here. So let me just go back. The very discussion that we had and what we're here is, of course, to discuss the coming shape-up of the EU emissions trading system. And the point of coming is very much about the Commission. So you've been, in that sense, slightly missing in the beginning of our discussion. Just to come back now and target you, there's been, of course, a lot of, there's been a consultation already. There's been a lot of speeches where the European Commission has already indicated some of the things it looks to do in June when it comes out with a reform proposal. But specifically asking you now, also that an orientation debate is starting on Wednesday among the College of Commissioners. Do you plan to extend the emissions trading system to the buildings and transport sector when you come out with your proposal in June?
Well, that orientation debate is on Thursday, but indeed the Commission is debating, let's say, the general outlines of this package that will see the light of day somewhere in June. We still hope to make that deadline, and we have good hopes to make that deadline. And we see, we see merit in extending the ETS to the buildings and road sector for three reasons. First, as we know from experience, Marco and others can prove that, is that a cap and trade system is one of the most efficient ways to ensure meeting a target. And we are talking about the building and road sector that have been notoriously lacking in meeting those targets. Not only because of their fault, I mean, I'm not sure whether I can address the building sector as such, but it's pretty difficult. So we think we need a new instrument there to incentivize decarbonization. And also the ETS gives you the option to put the price incentive exactly at the point where the action can take place, the action to decarbonize. For instance, in the road sector, you would do that for the fuel producers or the fuel importers, the big refineries, so to speak. And there you put a real incentive to create, decarbonize, limit the greenhouse gas intensity of the fuels that you bring on the market, because that will deliver you the option to buy less allowances and have a comparative advantage on the others. That's how market mechanisms work. And the third aspect of it is maybe the most important one. We always talk about price increases. Heating fuels, transport fuels might increase in price if we start decarbonizing them. If you do that in a regulatory way, the prices will go up too. So if you regulate, for instance, the greenhouse gas intensity of heating fuels and say, well, it can only be X grams per kilowatt hour produced in heat, you will increase the price. That price will eventually end up at the consumer's level. Not all of it, luckily, but a large part of it. That will happen if you regulate. It will also happen if you imply an ETS system, if you apply an ETS system. But the unique aspect of the ETS system is that it will give you also the revenues to mitigate price increases in a very targeted way, fighting energy poverty. So we see three good reasons to indeed consider this as beneficial. And whether we will move on and for real propose it, that will be clear once we propose it.
Well, thanks for that. Just exactly to just jump into then Adam and Marco, because over the last 30 minutes, we've heard many arguments while they think your arguments are wrong. So I'll turn to Marco now.
And I wasn't there. That's a pity.
So I always hope, because it's a polite sentence in Brussels, that when you jump in a conference, you say, I agree with everything that has been said before. It's been overused a bit as a sentence. So I was wishing Diederik would do that one. No, I'm not saying there shouldn't be an ETS system for housing and transport. I said it shouldn't be in the system with electricity and industry. There is still a major decision to take because the price elasticities, because of the fact that if you want a transport model shift, you should have all transport in one system. So aviation with shipping, with normal mobility, automotive and transport, that makes sense in an environmental way. If you put it in one system with industry and electricity, they pay a small price and the price for industry goes up unnecessarily. So two systems with a link is an option that should really be on the table. Which can then meet the multiple targets.
I can already assure you that we are very well aware, because of the impact assessment work that we did, of the different price incentives and different price elasticity. So if we would propose it, it would be a different, an adjacent system, to be so to speak. Okay. So maybe with linkages, increasing the linkages over time, but a careful approach.
I think that's already gives probably cause for some relief by some of our viewers. Adam, how do you respond to some of the plans that Diederik just laid out?
Well, I thought that the three arguments were very interesting, and because for each of them, I straight away had a question in mind. But the first, Diederik wasn't here, but I mentioned that we did analysis in our case on the price impacts on different sectors. And we found that actually pricing for transport and building was not the most efficient solution. And I was wondering whether, the Commission and what other options the Commission had considered. Maybe we need another instrument, but what other instruments did you consider apart from pricing when you did your impact assessment and came to the conclusion that pricing is indeed the best option to go forward. I think that the second issue I see with the second argument is I think it's going to be difficult to set a single price across Europe, especially if you think in terms of heating. and it's going to be particularly challenging to set one price for Copenhagen and one price for Bucharest, especially given the fact that in Bucharest they're using much more coal to heat themselves than they do in Copenhagen. So the poorest ones are going to be even more impacted than the richer citizen. And this is why, and it's about the revenues that are generated from the system. If you are generating revenues mostly taking from poorer households, it's going to be, even if you redistribute them back to poorer households, it's going to be difficult to address the social impact of that instrument.
I would love to turn to Haege in a second, but Diederik, if you could just respond to that point, also how you consider dealing with the energy and poverty as well as social implications of the proposals.
Yeah, but first, the first question, because that's very interesting. Obviously, we do consider other instruments, and I can tell you already now that extending the ETS to roads and buildings will not be the only instrument dealing with roads and buildings. For instance, because we have another very efficient and effective instrument, which is called CO2 emission standards for cars. And for housing and buildings, we have the Energy Performance for Buildings Directive. So we have also regulatory instruments, and our impact assessment, already the climate target plan, of which the impact assessment is public, already showed that a mixed approach is probably the best way to go. I know the economists rule that for every goal you have one instrument and one instrument alone, otherwise you're not effective. That's good in a perfect world, and we're not living in a perfect world. We are not pushing a very simple thing forward towards 55%. We actually, you could call it, we are actually herding cats towards that goal. So you need multiple instruments coming from multiple sides. And that's the conclusion of our analysis, and the balance of those instruments will be struck in the final legislation. And then on the second point, when I speak about distributional aspects, redistributional possibilities of extending the ETS, and mind you, extending the ETS to roads and buildings is extending the ETS to the largest emitters or one of the largest emitting sectors in Europe. So you increase the ETS not insignificantly. So you have some redistributional options, and that's not just within member states, from poor households and rich households, but also between member states, let's say Denmark and Romania, if I take your examples. And so you have the option of creating a more fairer Europe. And also there, I want to point you at the climate target plan and its impact assessment that show that if you do the redistribution right, and I immediately admit that that's the most difficult part of policy. So really targeting redistribution, it's going to be an incredible task. But if we do that right, we even create a fairer society. So not only greener, but also fairer. And there's one way to redistribute pretty effectively if you look at our ultimate goal, sustainability, which is not just handing checks to poor households, but to renovate their house on our costs, let's say on public costs, on the costs that you can pay for by the auctioned revenues. If you renovate houses on a large scale and you start off with social housing, affordable housing, the houses in which tenants live that don't have a large amount of cash at hand, then you have multiple, I would say 3 goals in one stroke. You create more sustainability, more energy efficient houses. You obviously create more jobs, and you give those people more purchasing power. The people living there. And that's always handy in times of crisis.
As you already said, that's like an ideal scenario, but based on what you're saying, does the Commission plan to propose tapping a certain share of these extended ETS revenues to then really dedicate those funds for specific purposes, be that social housing renovation or other thing? Is that something we're going to see?
That's an interesting idea. Yeah, let us play with that for a while and come back to it as soon as we have the legislation ready. So obviously, as I said, it's a very interesting idea. But we're dealing with subsidiarity here. We're dealing with effectiveness. We shouldn't think that from Brussels you can really steer, let's say, the rural area of Bulgaria into the right direction. But still, it's a pretty interesting idea to create an overarching instrument to help member states achieving their goals in the most just way possible. We're not talking about the just transition for nothing.
And I guess in the most targeted way possible too, no? Since that is always part of the revenue discussion, making sure that the funds really go where they're supposed to go. Marco, I saw you were signaling.
Yeah, just to add one to Diederik's three, what you would do as well is create the market for EU industry, which is the renovation wave, which can be a big part of the market we need to make the money to decarbonize on the industrial side. Is you combine that with the carbon contracts for difference, or at least a focus to get low carbon chemicals, steel, cement in those renovations, then you have what the FT always calls, or Politico, a double whammy. That's a favorite word, but maybe this is a quadruple one in this case.
Yeah, well, and here is a very interesting thing, and especially directed at the chemical industry. I know there's developments ongoing to develop paint with the same insulation value as 9 centimeters of rock wool. That would create a revolution in the renovation business, because then you can just paint your wall. It's a bit thicker paint than normal paint, obviously, but you can just paint your wall and you have an insulated wall. If you do that at 4 walls, you have an insulated house. I know that stuff costs $1 million per square meter right now, which is not really affordable, but here we go. Innovation, scaling up, and we might get there much sooner than we think. And we can use the funds also from the ETS. The current ETS is already distributing money to an innovation fund that we can use for this stuff. And we only increase the urgency, but also the possibilities for such a move forward.
But now then, sorry, Kalina, I'm overtaking you a bit. One remark, Diederik. Our sector has a double twin transition. So every sector has digital and climate. On top, we have circular and low tox. We have the chemical strategy for sustainability. This weekend even, there was an announcement with this incredible white paint developed, which reflects so much sunlight you wouldn't need cooling anymore. But it's a nanotechnology, and there's probably with the barium sulfate, there's a number of hazard properties that the chemical strategy won't like. So what we said, in addition to Mr. Bertrand's ecosystems, in addition to the sectoral roadmaps in the climate law, what we actually need is a sectoral Green Deal where we can sit around the table and connect all the different things together. That's what CEFC still needs to give hands and feet. And I'm hijacking your debate, Kalina. I will stop it there, but
not at all.
We need to get that on one table.
Thanks to Diederik, I think every chemical industry lobbyist in town knows what you should put in their subject line. Highly efficient paint, and off they go with a meeting in the Commission. But before we turn, I would quickly wanted to turn to Adam, but first to Haege. Based on what you've heard, the proposals, how do you view the effectiveness of them and the practicability of that? And are there any alarm bells that are ringing?
I just wanted to comment also on the discussion about multiple instruments that, with the last time you reformed the ETS, there was a lot of discussion around overlapping policies and interfering with the UTS. I think now we're a bit beyond that. You need. I like the image of herding. It's kind of all policies need to be targeting the same goal towards 2050, and also these national policies that are kind of going in the same direction. It's without front runners on the national policy side, would you really have the political acceptance to go for 55? So it's kind of everything needs to work together, and this whole package is also not only about the UTS anymore. It's about the full overhaul of the energy and the climate legislation, basically. So big job.
Adam, because we're exhausting our extended yet limited time, are there any more reactions also to some of the proposals you heard with regard to the usage of revenues and the sovereignty of member states?
Well, for me, that's a difficult question because I'm responsible for climate, environment, energy in Poland, and I would therefore be very happy with spending all these resources only on my projects. I'm sure some of my colleagues in the government may differ, but I think when I look at the way we discuss even internally the programming of the different EU instruments, the cohesion funds and the recovery and resilience facility, I think there is really a wide understanding in the Polish government of the big challenges that we have ahead of us. We are already currently using most of the revenues from the ETS. We are designing the legislation for that, on one hand to modernize the energy sector, and on the other hand to support energy intensive industries. And that's consuming it's going to be consuming the ballpark of that money. But the challenge is that even if we would assign 100% of these revenues only to climate related projects, that would still be less than what Polish companies are contributing to the ETS. So with the current system, we see that we have a big part of what the economy is contributing to the system that is actually evaporating in the meantime.
If I'm just looking at how much time I still have, because there are a number of audience questions that are very targeted and need Diederik for answer. And so I'll just take the opportunity quickly to do. So we've had numerous questions about whether the ETS proposal will also consider extending it to the shipping sector, and why you consider the ETS for that and not, for example, the effort sharing regulation. I think based on the answers you've given us, it seems that you're mulling this, but if you could just elaborate quickly on that question.
Well, yeah, extending the ETS to the maritime sector is an old wish. It was actually already elaborated or worded in the political guidelines of the von der Leyen Commission. So that was our starting point. But again, here too, our impact assessment shows that it is a pretty effective instrument. You're talking about big shipping owners here that have the ability to translate a price incentive into action, and more action than just on the fuels, because otherwise you could say, well, just put it into the Renewable Energy Directive and renew the fuels, have a blending mandate or whatever. But actually, reducing the carbon intensity of shipping is about much more than fuels itself. It's about obviously the engines, turning that fuels into driving power, but also the ships itself and the way you operate. So the ETS gives you a very, let's say, pretty simple instrument, one instrument to get that whole machinery, so to speak, in motion in order to decarbonize the maritime sector. And we are pretty far away from a fully decarbonized maritime sector. We should be aware of the fact that they are burning the cheapest and dirtiest fuel on Earth. Which is just the rest of what is left over if we have turned oil into gasoline, diesel, and kerosene. And the stuff that is left over is put into a ship, and it makes it a pretty hard to abate sector. I feel for the sector, but I'm also optimistic about the innovation that is going on there.
I think that's a good message to all the sectors that have so far been at least not super fully targeted by the Commission's climate policies, that you feel for them, but their time has come. And so I think that's a general warning to everyone out there. A final question before I sadly have to wrap up is by Femke de Jong, just because we're talking about modernizing industry and the economy. And so she's asking specifically about the ETS's modernization fund, which is of course also dear to Poland's concern, whether the modernization fund should in future exclude all investments in fossil fuels and prioritize just energy efficiency and renewable energy. Diederik, is that something that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think the rules and the eligibility rules for spending the money, the criteria for spending the money on the modernization fund should move over time towards that ideal endpoint that we are all talking about, a fully energy efficient and renewable economy. I do also acknowledge that the modernization fund is specifically targeted for countries that have a challenge moving from largely coal or even lignite powered economies towards a fully renewable economy. And in that transition, I cannot exclude that sometimes at some point in time, at some location, investments in gas are a very good idea. obviously preventing us from locking us in or whatever, but we now have the technology to turn gas infrastructure into renewable infrastructure if we use them for renewable gases. So we have a lot of instruments to fund the transition. Some of them will be exclusively targeted at the best of the best, the gold standard, the renewable technology that we all strive for. But some of them have also you have to use to take everybody along, again, in the spirit of the just transition where nobody and no region and no country is left behind. So I cannot exclude the fact that the modernization fund might be financing some transitional gas infrastructure in the near future in order to make that transition as one Europe.
I hear angry outcries in green quarters, but judging from your formulations, it seems that also the taxonomy discussion and gas discussions have made everyone in the Commission probably the most diplomatic, tiptoeing gas communicator ever. So just for that reason, and also because you've been very busy this afternoon, can Brussels expect a taxonomy sustainable investment delegated act tomorrow, and will it continue to carve out the gas and nuclear for later this year, as we've seen based on leaks?
I can't say anything about the content, unfortunately, but I would set my watch for tomorrow, yeah. Maybe the press conference might be a day later, you know, the whole conundrum of the Commission having to lay out several legislative proposals, and there's more on the agenda of the college tomorrow, but yes, this week we might see something.
Well, thanks for that. And with these exciting news for everyone who's been following the taxonomy saga, hooray, I guess, for the time being. And then with that, I say thank you very much also for the late joiner and the panel that has been keeping a very interesting discussion alive for the past hour. So first of all, thanks to Haege, thanks to Adam, thanks to Marco, and thanks to Diederik. Also, thanks to our audience for following online, and especially for those that put their name under the questions. I can assure you it makes it easier to read and more attractive to read. So please add your names and don't stay anonymous. So just as an advertisement for our next event, that's the Energy Vision series, which will continue on a session on 5th for 55, so the big climate legislation package that we've been talking about, where the ETS reform is one crucial element of. And that will take place on May the 5th and will be moderated by my wonderful colleague, Carl Matheson. And then, of course, thanks also to our partner, PKEE, for making this event possible. And before I say goodbye, we want to read the results of the poll, which I'm waiting to see. Short-sighted as I am, so please bear with me. As we read before, the questions were, are you in favor of extending the current EU ETS scope to new sectors, and in particular the buildings and transport sectors? As we could hear from the discussion, it's a heated and controversial issue in itself. However, our viewers seem to be quite excited about it. And with 41%, the audience said, yes, the EU ETS should be extended to buildings and the transport sectors, while 37% say no. However, a separate standalone ETS for buildings and transport should be established to put a carbon price on these sectors. And that suggests that the Commission might be actually not totally off public or at least professional sentiment on that question. With that, I say goodbye. Thanks for following and staying with us. And please let us know what you thought. Send us your feedback at events@politico.eu. Bye-bye.